we were left with very few months of cash, of runway, and no one hot in the pipeline. So we had to restart the round from zero, and then pandemic came. That was the worst time in our history for sure.
Doug, it's a pleasure to have you as my guest. Welcome to the
A
J Curve.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I thought we are going to start with a little bit on you. So, if you could talk about some main milestones or stages of your personal and professional growth that put you on an entrepreneurial journey before starting Swap, that would be
Yeah.
incredible.
Yes, sure. So I think I never thought myself as an entrepreneur before. This was never part of my career path plan when I was studying engineering back in 2000, 2005. But I always liked to solve problems. That's what drove me to become an engineer in the first place. So that was probably the first defining moment in my career, is becoming an engineer. Then after I graduated, 2 years down the road, more or less, my father decided it was time for him to retire, but he didn't want to stop. So we decided to open a pizza place. And that was the first like real entrepreneurial activity that I had. It was super cool because we basically just bought a very small place and started doing a turnaround. It was fun to throw all the management and all the frameworks into a pizza place. So how do you think about going to market? How do you improve your portfolio to reduce the cost of goods sold? Right? It's a pizza like there is nothing very complex about that. But when you look at a menu that has 70 different pizzas and you start thinking about how many ingredients can be shared among those pizzas to reduce cost and to reduce waste, and that I think sparkled something inside me of really wanting to be an entrepreneur, but that was silent even after that. Then another defining moment was obviously when I went to get my MBA at University of Michigan. That's when I got exposure to a whole new world, people from around the world sharing a lot of interesting experiences. And also during that period, I had the chance to work in two big techs. I worked for Google as part of the sales ops team and Google Enterprise. And also, I did an internship at Amazon in the very early days of AWS as a PM intern for the S3. So that tech experience also sparkled something. Well, that's interesting. But I was at that time a management consultant before the MBA, and I came back to Brazil and continued on the management consulting track, working with McKinsey. And that also gave me a lot to build on my career today. So those were very defining moments, but the crucial moment or the pivotal moment that made me lean into entrepreneurship was obviously 99. I was head of corporate strategy there. That's when I really to know what the entrepreneurial ecosystem is like in Brazil, got connections, and obviously, being part of a very successful piece of history in Brazil for the startup ecosystem, which was the exit that 99 did when Didi acquired us, gave us a lot of confidence, right? And I always thought the risk return of being an entrepreneur was too high in Brazil, but having lived through that phase at 99 gave me all the courage and the perspective that this could be done again. The ecosystem was flourishing, everything was right to do the jump.
It was the right timing.
It was the right
And
timing.
what was this aha moment when you realized that you're ready to transition from being a consultant in McKinsey towards heading the strategy in a startup? Because 99 was still a startup with a startup mentality and a
Yeah.
very different approach to doing things.
So I always judged this risk return and the how hard it is to do the jump, right? If the returns are too low and the risk too right, obviously the jump is too big to take. At that time, I was not very happy at McKinsey because I was looking for a different kind of job, a different kind of challenge, and McKinsey was not fulfilling my needs at that point anymore. And at the same time, 99 had just completed the Series C round. It was a $200 million round, the largest round to that date in any company in Latin America. It was the first time SoftBank was investing in any company in Latin America. And the job I was taking on was a strategy job, which was not far from my core skills. So everything was right. The company was sexy, had a lot of money, and the job seemed close enough to what I thought I knew that made the change possible. And at that point, it was 2017. I said, well, this is obviously picking up now in Brazil. A lot of things are starting to happen. The rocket phase has passed. Now a lot new companies are emerging. If I want to do the jump, that's the time.
So I love unusual hobbies or unusual experiences. I have a number of those myself. And when I ask you to send me 5 things that you really are passionate about, obviously your work in startup and VC ecosystem was on top of the list, but there was something that brought my attention, which was the fact that you are a home brewer, with something that you started 10 years ago with your father. And it seems to be a repetitive pattern or a tradition of you doing something with your father, talking about that pizza place that you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of drives your passion to continue being a home brewer? And how do these traditions come to be in terms of your relationships with your father?
Yeah. So my father is a very simple person. He attended only the primary school, and he's a self-made man. He started as a mailman in a company and left, and he retired as a director of the company. So being a very simple person, he managed to drive his way through life and be a successful person in any case. But he does not have the sophistication to understand what I'm going through or what the kind of work I'm doing or anything like that. So creating something that we can share really to level the playing field where we can discuss something at the same level without going to what is happening with the life or the complexities of what the
Of
VC
strategy and
a VC run, VC backed startup mean and anything else. So that's all about it. It was a place to create this kind of connection and something that we could spend a number of hours together, having a good time and being able to discuss before and after that, planning and then just tasting the beer, right? Drinking beer and doing barbecue is something that we used to do a lot. So that was the main idea, and what I love about it is that even after all those years, it keeps us on track to being connected, to discussing, to learning new things together. It's a good way to foster that relationship, and it's also very pleasant to afterwards share that beer with someone else and be proud of the results that we get. And we can discuss my beer was better than your beer or something like that. So it's really nice. But on top of all the relationship itself, home brewing is something that is it's a constant learning, a constant process of perfecting what you are doing. There are so many elements, so hard to control. It's at the same time observing the beauty of nature because it's what we say is that we are not brewing anything, we're just mixing things, and the nature is actually brewing because it's a fermentation process. So it's observing the nature force in play while also trying to influence it and learning how things are connected and what causes. will impact the effect that you are seeking. So all of that is about strategizing, and we can elaborate on that. But it's not different than what we're trying to do when you are an engineer or you're trying to do when you are managing a company. Is trying somehow to break the pieces of a very complex problem in its small, semi-controllable pieces, influencing those pieces alone, and hoping for the collection of those pieces to be the end result that you were expecting.
I feel like we can spend the whole podcast talking about brewing. But I really love your intentional approach towards maintaining and strengthening relationships, especially given how different your mode of operandi and just in general reality is. Swap. The inspiration behind Swap came when you were at 99. So, walk me through the foundational story of Swap. What led to that decision to kind of spin it out and, become a full-time entrepreneur? And more broadly, what were the lessons that you took with you from 99 experience and applied to Swap later on?
Yeah. So Swap was born as an idea within 99 when I was looking for opportunities to expand the business. I came across the opportunity in payments. It's nothing new. It's been like a reality for marketplaces for, I don't know, maybe over 30 or 40 years to expand from buying and selling things to participating in the money movement flow, right? You see that eBay and PayPal many years ago. And that continued to be a very advantageous strategy for marketplaces. And seeing 99 as a marketplace, obviously, one potential expansion of the business was to go into payments. Moreover, a lot of other e-hailing companies at that time were doing the same thing. You think about Grab. Grab had already launched GrabPay, Ola Pay, and a number of other players. So I started doing some benchmarks, and it was obvious that the market conditions in Brazil, plus the industry specifics of being a marketplace, made it for a very good, compelling case to start a payment business within 99. And that's what we set out to do early in 2018, right after Didi acquired the operation. I started the payments area to create the 99 Pay, the wallet for the ecosystem. Today, I heard that it has over 15 million active users or so. So it became something large. The industry conditions pushed that way. The market conditions at that time were that the central bank was pushing for a more competitive landscape, opening up the market for new entrants, lowering the entry barriers for non-financial institutions to operate. So everything was, and at the same time, the large banks were still controlling the majority of the flow. It was very expensive. The service quality was not good. So you had a perfect storm there to launch a payment business. At that time, anyone who would go to a restaurant would see probably 10 or 15 QR codes on the counter from companies that were trying to establish closed loop solutions. That was obviously before Pix came in. Everybody was trying to do a peer to peer payment system or something like that. So it was booming. We started doing the plan for launching. It was very hard at that time. We couldn't find good partners to do it. The technology was not flexible enough. The financials were not good enough. It was hard to find specialists. So it was very hard for a non-financial company to launch a financial service. And that was the push. One hand, we saw the demand rising with everybody trying to launch their super app, their wallet. And on the other hand, the inability to find good partners. So there was a market gap, obvious market gap. And when I saw it, we jumped at it.
What were the learnings that you took with you to Swap in terms of being part of 99 during probably the most successful and the most challenging time for the company?
Yeah, a number of learnings for sure. One is the the value of the team. I think 99 would manage to create such a interesting environment that attracted very good people. I don't think it was by chance. This was by design. So being able to create that environment is something that I'm still trying to replicate at Swap. Obviously with our own colors, but I'm very proud that we managed to hire very good people at Swap as well. And that was a learning from 99. People that are committed, people that are very driven, people that are really wanting to build something and are very, very hands down to the problem. Second thing was during 99 time, I managed to learn about the VC world and how to navigate it, at least a little bit. Now, after almost 6 years of Swap, I learned more. But at 99, I saw the power of having good investors backing the business and helping the business move forward. That was really important. And lastly, I think was the product centric and customer centric approach that Nine had. Even though Swap today is a B2B service, where we typically don't talk too much about the product itself. We remember how hard it was when we were at 99 to hire someone and how bad we felt from the relationship that our providers had with us. Um, and we don't want to replicate that. So I also learned what not to do at that time.
You mentioned fundraising, and we're absolutely going to talk about Swap. But one of the common feedbacks when I collected preparing myself for this interview was that you are very methodical and strategic when things relate to fundraising. And you managed to build a pretty impressive cap table, both from angel investors' perspective, but also bringing really high quality local and global funds. So, what was your approach? How your approach towards fundraising is evolving as you mature as a leader of a venture backed company? And what are some of the things that other founders can learn from your experience?
Sure. I learned a lot and I learned by doing mistakes, right? Um,
It's the best way to
it's
learn.
well, it's the most painful way to learn as well, right?
But you learn for good.
You learn for good. That's right. So when we left 99, it was not hard at all to get and secure our first round.
Which was 3 million?
That was 1.5 million, but back in 2018, when numbers were a little bit different than the reality we live in today. Uh, so we started the company in October 2018. In December, we received our first term sheet with just an idea and a PowerPoint. That that in a sense was very harmful to us because we thought it would always be that way.
That
And
easy.
that easy, exactly. And we were not so diligent with the process back then. So when we were hallucinating and thinking that we could go for a larger round in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we were just contacting the obvious names, the ones that are always on the news, and
The
doing
TechCrunch usual suspects.
exactly, and trying to do something quick and very niched at the same time. It obviously failed because we didn't build a large enough top of the funnel conversations to fuel the process. And when it was January to 2020, a potential leader that was very, very, very advanced and was one of the names that we wanted decided they were not going to invest. We were left with very few months of cash of runway and no one hot in the pipeline. So we had to restart the round from zero, and then pandemic came. That was the worst time in our history for sure, because we at that time were very pressed with the very small runaway, no investors willing to back us up, the pandemic causing the world to a halt, and it was hard. We managed to get a new round in May, but it was not without paying the high price of one, letting a lot of people go at that time. Well, not a lot, but half of the team, which were 15 people at that point.
It was probably more painful because it was a close and
It
a
was a
relatively
close
small
knit,
team.
yes. So it was a hard process. And from that moment on, I said, okay, we managed to survive. I'm not going to let this happen again. So from the day one after the check hit our bank account, I started running a thorough process preparing for the next round. And all the contacts that we opened up for that present round, I kept on a very tight CRM where I could know how hot the conversation was, how important that conversation was for us and for the investors, and how often were we touching base. Um, and through that process, I was building relationship throughout the time, constantly updating interesting potential partners, adding new potential partners as we go, always asking for referrals and connections. So when it was the time to do the Series A, I was having already a very intense push from the market to do the funding round. So it was not something that I was thinking, well, I think this is time now to do. It was something that was coming from the market as feedback saying, I think you were ready. Aren't you going to fundraise soon? Let's keep in touch. When I did it, I was withholding a lot of people asking me for more information, for more for spreadsheets and so on. I was withholding everyone until the point that I opened up a VDR, a virtual data room, with all the information there at the same time to everyone. So I did a very
How many leads did you
systematic.
have in this? Did you have in the funnel?
At that point, I had 100 VCs that I was managing. I sent out the invitation to about 50-ish to participate in the round.
And what was your approach towards selecting or thinking about how to select partners? You mentioned that for the first round, you targeted, I mean, not for the first small round, but when you started Raise Next Round, you were targeting the usual suspects. How did your approach towards selecting potential partners change? And what did you learn about the VC founder partnership during this ride?
So I read a lot about the mechanics and the incentives around the VCs. One thing that I learned, and I think it was the most important factor, that VCs and VC partners talk to each other a lot. They share a lot of their funnel, a lot of their leads, and
Because they want to share risks.
they want to share risks. They want to validate if it's a good opportunity or not. And they typically go out to have drinks as well. So they are just like sometimes even bragging about themselves. Oh, look at this guy that we are advancing and everything. So one thing that is very important is the number the number of times that a partner heard about your company, not from yourself. Empirically, it to me made a lot of sense to have as much conversations as possible, to have as many people talking about the company and influence a potential VC that I wanted to target from multiple sources. That made a lot of difference because it not only gets you in front of the right partner, but it also gets you in front of them in the right state of mind because they've heard from you many times before. They are already excited about learning more. It's completely different. And one thing that I never did during this entire process is to cold call anyone. I always asked someone who was excited about Swap to introduce me to a new partner. So the first approach to selecting was not selecting at all. Anyone that would be happy to talk to me, I would be happy to talk to as well, because that creates that effect. The second thing is during those conversations that are not targeting to really a fundraise, but rather just building relationship, I talk about the company for a while, obviously, but then I steer the conversation towards the industry and start doing problem solving and learning and just sharing information. That gives me two things. One, that time that I'm spending is not just selling company. It's actually instructing me about strategy, is giving me information about the market, is providing me with competitive analysis. So there is a lot of things that you can extract from a conversation like this, and during that process, you also learn who knows more about the industry, who could be a potential asset for further discussions, right? In the end, your investors will be the people that will discuss with you your strategy. Later down the road, you might create a full professional board, but at the early days, it's your investors who are sitting on your board that you are discussing strategy and the challenges with. So you might as well learn how to do that before they become your investor and you are tied with them for 10 years or so.
When you qualified those 50 leads and you opened the data room for all of them, what was your approach towards getting to closing of the round? How did you manage that relationships since that point?
So I received the term sheet 3 days after I opened the data room. And
And we have to say that it was
it
2021.
was, it was, it
So
was a different
there was
time.
a little bit of bonanza in fintech, and
Totally.
40% of capital flew to fintech. So there was a little bit of free riding opportunity from the market perspective.
Of course, but that is associated with the element of the market telling me when to open the data room, not the other way around. So when I opened the data room, I had about 10 VCs that were constantly pressing me to open it already, that were meeting with me once every other week to get updates. So I felt it was really hot. Not only that, I was providing pieces of information selectively to some of them in the sense of building trust and building the case. So when I received the term sheet, the partner that did it, Alex at Tiger, he was building the case preemptively before I opened the data room. So it was not that, so, okay, I'm just writing checks without diligence. So he had already done all the diligence before. He was basically just sitting and waiting for me to say, go and go. After that, then it became a completely different process because 3 days in, after I opened the data room, I sent out another email to all those players saying, well, look, guys, we now have a term sheet on the table. Let's schedule meetings. And I opened up the agenda, obviously, with 5 to 10 meetings every day to talk with all of those potential players in the next 4 or 5 days to now go through a Q&A, see if they have additional questions and trying to get more people on board.
So you actually ran it as a process. It
Yes,
was a very well structured fundraising process.
it was a process, a very thought thought of process.
Swap, you mentioned strategy, and I love how everything you touch has some element of strategy to it. So, to put things in context, how big is Swap today? Where are you today in terms of operations, team, whatever else you are happy to disclose?
Yeah, sure. So we have today around 50 clients as partners. Considering that we are B2B to B model, those 50 partners They serve over 15,000 corporate clients with their products. So that's a very large base of end users, right? We've issued over 6 or 7 million accounts so far. So a lot of people are already using swap products indirectly without knowing. We grew this year in 23, we grew 2.2 times year over year. And we left the year profitable in December, having grown more than 35% in December versus November. So we continue to have a pretty interesting track record and a very robust performance in terms of business that now is set to double next year, this year in 24, double again in 25. And this is only based on the volume that I have with the existing client base without considering new clients that we are constantly adding. And the other thing that changed from 21 is the kind of logos that we are attracting. Before we were attracting mostly early stage startups that have successfully scaled and that the primary source of our growth. But now we are attracting consolidated logos and traditional players as well, which will even enhance our ability to grow because they have already built a very large user base.
So let's talk about strategy. If you were maybe to distill few tactics or few elements of strategies that you got right in terms of go to market that led to this pretty much the J curve growth.
Yeah, it is. And I hope it continues to be there. So, our strategy has basically three elements to it. The first one is that we want to be very focused on specific use cases. And that gives us an edge in terms of product and in terms of knowledge.
Can you give
Uh,
an example?
yes. So rather than be a very generalist banking as a service provider, we focus on on the first level, B2B payments. On the second level, our initial product was targeted at the CHRO stack, providing helping companies that provide employee benefits to their corporate clients. That's a very, very specific niche, right? But it expands from there to also the CFO stack, where we can provide products and services for use cases like corporate expense management, for travel and expenses, for logistics, and it keeps going. So it's not that we are restricting the use case itself, although we are launching one by one because of roadmap, but that's a very important cornerstone of our strategy. The focus that we have there allows us to build products that are more inherently adherent to the use case itself. They have a greater depth to the extent of what they can do. So that in combination allows our clients to launch something faster and cheaper. Sometimes our client, and even now, clients are launching their services without even integrating with us, using a full-fledged white label platform that ranges from the processing stack, the whole core banking stack, the risk anti-fraud, the license, and the front end. So we provide the entire product in a box, and a client can launch that in a cheaper and faster way. That's element number one. It was important in the past, more important in the past than it's now, because as a startup, you only can do so many things at the same time, right? So we started by being a very generic player, but then we realized we were constantly suffering from not having all the specific requirements and products that are required for all the use cases. But we had something that was very powerful for one use case. So deploying capital in a way that would leverage our strength rather than just spreading out was very important for us to nail the product market fit first. So that's element number one. Element number two is quality. of products and services. As I said, when we were at 99, we were very frustrated by the level of quality and the level of service that we were receiving from the providers, and we wanted to build something different. And being at the position on the value chain that we are very critical provider to all our clients. Their business run on top of our services. So we cannot provide something that is not working or that is not allowing them to grow. Our client cannot be concerned about that. And the third element is an element of equality in the ecosystem. Again, what we learned in at 99 was that the value proposition was very skilled towards the provider back in that time when they were because they had privileged access to the infrastructure, the payment infrastructure, they would extract all the value for them and leave the costs for the customer. We changed that perspective, and today we have a much fair share with our clients in a way that pretty much all our clients sees us as a profit center because we are the ones generating revenues for them rather than a cost center. So you combine those three elements, that's the kind of performance you get.
I love that you said that as a startup, you can only do as much. But at the same time, you really need to kind of have the process towards understanding what is the niche or the vertical that is right to focus, right? So, what was your approach towards understanding what are those few use cases that you should go all in?
You want the textbook answer or the real
No,
answer?
I want the real one.
So look, reality when you start a startup, you don't really know where you're gonna land, right? Our first pitch deck was saying that our target was marketplaces because that's where we came from. That's what we thought the need was for. And our first client was not a marketplace. Our first client, by chance, was a B2B payment startup. We started there. And once we built everything for that use case, we learned how powerful that was and how unique that was as well. And we said, well, look, we are constantly trying to add new use cases and to build new features, but we already have something that is very powerful. So we leverage that piece of technology that we built for one case to then expand in adjacencies from there. That's an approach that I, for many times, applied to my clients as a management consultant. Like, look at your strengths, understand where your core competence is. What is the asset that you have that makes you unique, and just expand from there, right? And one thing that going back to 99 and the learnings from 99 during the time that I was working with the Chinese after the Didi acquisition, I learned a lot about a strategy with them as well from a perspective, from a historical perspective, actually, when you look at the art of war. And one thing is to read that book. The other thing is to work with people that have on that book their strategy guide. And there is one thing on that book that says always fight from a position of strength and always care for the assets that gives you that position of strength. And that's basically what we did and how we figured out where to focus.
So, every company in the future will be a fintech company.
Hmm.
This is a quote by Angela Strange, a partner at A16Z. Would you agree with that? And what's your take on the role of financial services within enterprise more broadly in Brazil and maybe globally?
I used to agree 100% with that at the beginning of Swap. It was about the same time that I actually met with Angela for doing a pitch for her. It was really good conversation. But at that time, I was leaning more on the generalist approach to banking as a service. And I wanted to believe that was true because that would help my case. After 5 years working in this industry, I came to realize that not all the companies will become a fintech. All the companies will have, in one sense of the other, to provide financial services within their platform, but that doesn't make them a fintech per se. The reality is building a financial service and becoming a fintech in the common sense means that you have to invest a lot in infrastructure, you have to build a lot of things in house, and that is very expensive. It only makes sense when it makes sense. I don't expect the grocery on the corner to become a fintech themselves. But if you take Oxo, then it makes sense for Oxo to become a fintech, right? They already have, I don't know, maybe 20,000 outlets scattered across many countries in Latam. For them, it makes sense. So I don't think every company will become a fintech, but every company will have to somehow provide financial services for their customer base, being just accepting payments in a easier and more straightforward way, being it giving payment terms to allow customers to buy and pay later or whatever that is. I think it's becoming more the norm that the companies will provide some kind of financial service and not become a fintech itself.
We already touched a little bit on growth, but as we spoke just before the recording, you mentioned that the company today is 200 people and this is a distributed team. And you grew from 30 people to 200 people in 2 years.
We actually started scaling after Series A that happened in September 21. So we had 30 people ish at that time. At the end of 21, we had 45 people. And then in the end of 22, we had 200 people.
So let's talk a little bit about your approach towards building a distributed team and building the culture. You mentioned that one of the things that you've learned in 99 is the culture and being able to attract the most talented people. And then you said that you're doing that with adding your own colors. So, what are your own colors and what is your approach towards building the team, strengthening the team, and leading the team in the distributed space?
It was, again, part intentional, part by accident, right? Pandemic came. We had an office before the pandemic, and then we shut down the office. And when we started hiring again, we just said, well, we don't know when this is going to come back. And it was hard to hire anyway. So we started hiring whatever the talent was without caring too much for the city or how we going to bring those people together at some point. We had a hypothesis before the pandemic of having multiple hubs already. So Swap already had at that time an office in Sao Paulo, an office in Florianopolis. So we were experimenting with that, and when pandemic came, we just said, okay, let's go full remote, and we scaled the company to 200 people that way in that context. So it was a little bit by chance in that sense. But then the intentional approach was to have in place a very robust set of, let's say, statements that would allow us to communicate what the culture and what the behaviors we expect are. So we have something that is called drive. It's the 5 dimensions of what we expect from all the swappers to be: deployer of solution, a researcher that pushes boundaries, impact-oriented decision maker, a valuable colleague, an empathetic stakeholder influencer. So with that in hand and a very detailed level by level on the company expectation for each one of those dimensions allowed us to hire the people that would have a fit with that, to manage that people and measure the performance against that set of behaviors. That helped us create the culture. The other thing that we did was in 22, when we were scaling that fast, we set out to do offsites every other month. So every 2 months, we would bring everybody together for 2, 3 days to discuss strategy, to set the KPIs for the next 2 months, and to really just connect. It was super important at that time because, give or take, everyone that was coming in on board would spend at most 1 month before get to know everyone in person. That was still during the late stage of pandemic, so it was a little bit challenging, but it helped a lot build the culture.
You mentioned growth several times. So you grew in terms of number of people, you grew in terms of revenue, number of customers. What were or was the hardest element of managing this growth for you personally?
There are so many things about growing that is hard. One thing, going back to 2020, one thing that I learned there about growth is that you grow all the metrics in the company exponentially when you are an early stage startup. You grow revenue, you grow client acquisition, but you also grow costs exponentially. Sometimes it grows faster than the other elements. So one thing that you have to pay attention is everything grows a lot in the growth phase, not only the good things, the bad things as well. Communication challenges also grow exponentially when you are growing the team. The number of nodes that you are adding to that network makes everything much harder. So it's harder to make decisions. It's harder to get the message across. Takes longer for people to just understand the context. And probably that was one of the hardest things after the cost thing. Communication, I think, is one of the hardest to scale when you're growing that much.
How did you go around solving for those
I'm
issues or
still trying
obstacles?
to. I'm still trying every day. We keep changing system. We keep adding new hypotheses. Just recently, we opened up an office in Sao Paulo. It's not intended to be an everyday office, but rather a place for people to do meetings with clients and in governance meetings within the company in order to try to boost that as well. That was that is the latest ongoing experiment we are doing on improving communication.
You mentioned that one of the criteria of the drive is empathetic
Stakeholder.
stakeholder and influencer. Can you elaborate a little bit on the influence parts? What
Yes.
does that mean in this context?
Yes, sure. So it comes from a book that I read on negotiation in the past from Harvard, Getting to Yes. It's a very, very thin but very well written book. And there is a story there about two sisters, two siblings that are negotiating around getting an orange, and they had only one orange, and they were discussing who would get the orange. In the end, they split the orange in half, and that seems good enough, right? But if you deep dive a little bit on the interests of each one, you would learn that one sister wanted the peel to bake a cake, and the other wanted the core to make a juice. So if they were to talk a little bit more and influence each other in getting a better decision, they would both get a better outcome of it. And that's the core of this element in our drive. And if you now translate this to our business, is a B2B business. So the relationships, the relationship that we build with our client, and at the scale being an enterprise client, is completely different than on the B2C world where you're the company, you don't even know who the customer is. My client has my WhatsApp number. He calls me, right? I know each one of the clients. So it takes us a different approach to that relationship. And each one of us within the company should be held accountable for having that kind of relationship and trying to maximize the output of the entire system, not just preserving our interest or fighting on a positional negotiation against the client. Is how can we enlarge the pie? How can we get a better outcome for everyone so that we as Swap can have our share of that?
So, in terms of growing the pie, if we look at the next maybe 2 to 3 years, what are your 3 to 5 main priorities as CEO for that period of time?
So we're going now from childhood to adolescence and early adulthood of the company, right? The the scrutiny on us from the regulators, for example, have obviously increased because we are a larger company. There are way more processes that we have to follow and to respect. The the stakes are much higher, a lot more money flowing through the platform. So the responsibility and the level of perfection that we have to have on the system is greater. So one of the priorities is to now formalize our processes, have more predictability, have more consistency in order to deliver the service that we are doing. In the end, our clients are with us because they believe we can handle the money right. So credibility is important and consistency, performance, repeatability is important. This is one of my priorities. Another priority is this is a constantly changing environment, both in terms of regulation and technology. Usually, we're talking about fintech, the payment industry is changing, and everything is changing. There is new regulations now pushing to open bank. There is Drax coming in. Pix was very successful, launch from the central bank, a lot of product innovation. So one of my priorities is making sure that we do not fall behind the curve. We have to stay ahead of the curve here. So how will AI impact our business? How will open finance impact our business? What else is happening in the world that we need to be aware of? And not only coming from me, how do I instill this mindset in the company so everyone becomes an innovation agent and change agent within the company? And lastly, is how we expand and obviously allocate capital in the right way. It's very, very easy to get excited about so many things, expanding internationally, expanding to new service lines, building new products. There's so much to do, so many opportunities. It's hard to focus. So my third priority is to allow the company to have a process to decide where to invest and how to expand correctly.
You mentioned the regulators, and this is great because it leads beautifully to my next questions. Central bank was unbelievably and is unbelievably successful in supporting the financial ecosystem growth in Brazil, both through the policy but also through the products that they roll out. You mentioned Pix, which is an instant payment system introduced by Brazilian government. I have some crazy numbers here from eBanks, actually. That 1 year after its creation in November 2020, Pix increased 14,000%. And by January 2022, it was already used by 71% of the population in Brazil, which makes it one of the most successful fintechs in the history of fintech. Given this approach of the regulators, what do you think are the spaces that would potentially become obsolete because the central bank is so efficient and it has regulatory power, in which a lot of fintechs could potentially be swapped by that? And what are the spaces that, given this policy, are super interesting to, build businesses or expand it?
I think the regulator has two agendas. One is to reduce the burden on the society. Uh, in that sense, anything that they can do to make it easier for the population to have access to the financial services, to make it more straightforward, to make it less company centric and more user centric, they will do. Pix is in that direction. The innovations on the open finance goes in that direction. The central bank is now openly talking about them building up a super app where all the banks are going to be connected, and the user will basically not know anymore which bank they're working with. So that's one agenda, very clear agenda. They want to reduce the burden both in terms of usability, they want to increase access, they want to reduce cost. The other agenda is to protect the financial system stability. So they had in the past a movement of opening up to a lot of new companies to operate in the financial system. They are now closing and increasing scrutiny over those companies. So they will continue to increase their oversight on the financial system in order to protect its stability. To answer your question, I think we have to look at those 2 points of the agenda, and understand what areas are going to be impacted. So companies that are simply facilitating payment are at risk of becoming obsolete. If your business is solely to do P2P transfer, well, Pix is there, right? You don't need you anymore. There is no space for a Venmo in Brazil system anymore. And companies that were built on that premise had to shift their focus. If you are only in the business of providing access to an account, perhaps that's not going to be needed anymore once the Drex is in place, right? Because the central bank will be able to distribute themselves the money and allow that money to exist without being deposited in any specific bank. I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I would be very concerned if I was into the business of mm, just allowing users to
Transact.
have access to the financial system. On the other hand, controlling and securing the stability of the business, the financial system, means that companies that are more more deeply connected with the financial ecosystem will have a place to exist and continue to have a place to exist, because those will be the companies, in a sense, that the central bank will count on to distribute the services. That's why I think, obviously, for very biased opinion, I think infrastructure is so interesting. But on top of that, one thing that the central bank will likely not do is to give money. So anything related to credit, to lending, to knowing the user behavior, predicting that user behavior will be areas that are going to be more or less protected from the changes in regulation.
Before we move to the rapid fire, I have a question related to, maintaining ability to not to crack under pressure,
Mm.
because you obviously live under a lot of pressure of growth, changing industry, necessity of staying on trends, necessity build the culture and skill teams, and so on and so forth. There's so many things that are happening. What is your approach towards maintaining sanity and physical health? And how do you make it part of your routine in a way that it's not occasional and you're actually focusing on that?
Yeah, it's something that became more prominent during the pandemic when we were all locked in. I started thinking I needed to be strategic and proactive about it, right? So I started learning and just consuming information on how to be more healthier, how to maintain sanity, and started doing some activities to help me on that. One thing, for example, was uh, when we were really in the lockdown, I started learning harmonica, playing harmonica. I'm not a musician. I don't know how to play music well, but it was something that would take me completely out of the day to day work and day to day living inside the apartment to a new world would force me to think in a completely different perspective. And learning something new is always very challenging. That really gets you in a different state of mind. So it was like meditating. I also started exercising more, just going to the gym as really a medicine. My cholesterol levels were high, my cortisol levels were high, and I just accepted the fact that doing exercise would be good for my health. It was really, I'm taking a pill every day. But with time, it became part of my habits. And today, I actually miss when I do not go to the gym. Um, but even there, technology helped me because one thing is doing like the same program for 3 months every day. Right? The other is with these apps that are now available. Every day is a different routine, so that gets you a little bit more excited. And I
Gives
also,
variety.
yeah, more variety exactly helps. And I also started taking care of my food, what I eat and how I eat. So every morning I take a shot with some phytotherapeutics, therapeutics to supplement with the things that are missing in my body. I changed my breakfast from the traditional bread and butter to more fruits, for example, with seeds and things like that. So it's a very holistic approach to thinking how can I make my body healthier to perform better. In the end, it is a very stressful life. I think that as management of a startup growing at the pace that we are compared to athletes in a sense, right? We are pushing our bodies, our minds to the limit. And if you look at any high performance athlete, they take care of their body very methodically. They will take that body as their main tool for performing their work. Why shouldn't we?
Aiming to that. I love the comparison with an athlete because you are an endurance athlete. And if your body fails you or if your mental health fail you, you can't operate that vehicle anymore. You need to fuel the car as you go.
Exactly.
All right, let's move to the rapid fire. I'll ask you 5 short questions
Okay.
and I'll appreciate your immediate responses. Let's dive right in. The first question is: what's one book or piece of content every founder should read and why?
Getting to yes. I think I just made my case.
I'm gonna find this chapter about oranges. Is there any popular entrepreneurial advice that you strongly agree or disagree with?
One of the first podcasts I listened when I started this was Masters of Scale, and on the very first episode, there is an advice saying get as much money as you can while you can, because the market changes and you cannot predict that. You don't know when you're going to need to pivot. You don't know when the market is going to go south, as we just saw. So get as much money as you can while you can.
If you were to have a dinner with any 4 people in the world, dead or alive, who would be at your dinner table and what would you talk about?
At this point in life, I would love to sit with Gandhi and talk about just his perspective on life and what matters most and why.
I'll take that over other 3 people. If you were to give a public talk, but you could not talk about business, tech, venture capital, or anything related to your current job, what would you talk about?
Home brewing would be very fun to do that. And but in a different perspective, I would make the case that if you are a high schooler, for example, you could potentially learn all the disciplines that you need to by learning how to homebrew. You can learn history, you can learn geography, you can learn biology, you can learn math, you can learn physics, and you can learn chemistry just by really going deep in the homebrewing.
I love that take. Last one. What's the next billion-dollar business that nobody's building yet in Brazil or in the world?
That's harder. If I knew the answer, I'll probably be building that as well.
Well, you're probably
No, I'm
building that as
building
well.
one,
You're
but you
certainly building that.
you said that no one is building yet.
some interesting
Um,
space that you see that is ripe with potential to create big companies?
I think nobody has really cracked yet the learning business. So the learning process with traditional schools are yet very are performed basically the same way for the past 200, 300 years. And yet everyone is going to school. So it's a very large addressable market, obviously, that is still being done in the traditional way. So it's probably an area where I would see a potential for disruption and someone who really nails it, how to potentially leveraging AI or so on, understand what would be the best piece of information I can give Olga right now that would like really boost her learning curve. That would be amazing.
Doug, it was an incredible pleasure to have you as my guest. Thank you for your very well articulated, very thoughtful, and very strategic approach towards our conversation. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for all the questions. It was really fun.